All eyes are on the government around how they're going to address the issue of housing in their first budget next week. So what can we expect? With us now is CEO of the Property Institute of New Zealand, Ashley Church. Tēnā koe, Ashley. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Tame.
What are you expecting next week?
With regard to housing, with regard to the budget in general?
With regard to housing in the budget.
Sure. Well, the budget in general, I think, just to set a context for what I'm about to say about housing, the budget, this is a really important budget for Grant Robertson because it needs to set the framework for the next 3 years for this term of government. It needs to basically set the economic credentials as to the blueprint for what these guys are likely to do and how that's all going to tie together. And so it's a really, really important document. And in that regard, the bigger picture is more important than the specifics and specific initiatives. But with regard to housing itself, I think there's going to be some reasonably clear things that will come out of it. Twyford's been doing quite a bit of work with regard to Kiwi Build, getting that established, making sure that the building blocks for that are in place. So I think one of the things that you can expect to see is some clarity around the numbers around Kiwi Build. I know that over the last 5 to 6 months, because of this 100,000 figure that Kiwi Build purports to be building 100,000 homes over 10 years, the media's jumped on the opportunity to whack them around the head with that and say, well, there should be 10,000 houses, where are they? So I think what you might expect to see is some clarity around what numbers you can actually expect. And I think if there's a number around sort of 10 to 12,000 in that first 3-year period, that'll be a pretty good achievement. You would expect that to ramp up over the following 7 years as capacity increases. Another thing I think you're quite likely to see, Jack, is an increase in the base funding for Kiwi Build. So you remember when that policy was first introduced, it was introduced with a budget of $1 billion, and that was so that it stayed within this fiscal cap that Robertson had put in place. And the problem with that, of course, is that they had to come up with this shonky scheme whereby they essentially had to recycle those funds. So they had to build houses, sell them, and then release those funds for more. I think that's proving to be a bit of a constraint, and so I expect you might see that there's some increase in the likelihood of that funding for Kiwi Build so that we can move ahead with that a little bit more quickly. There's also a possibility, I think you might see an announcement around one or more greenfield residential developments in Auckland as part of that whole Kiwi Build process.
So you're feeling optimistic?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think with regard to housing, I'm feeling reasonably optimistic. There are some downsides. There's already been the announcement in the last few days about ring fencing of capital of losses with for property investors, which is going to happen. The other thing I expect to see is some indication of funding for the establishment of something which will be called the New Zealand Housing Commission. Now that's a New Zealand First policy that was introduced as part of the coalition agreement, and that's this idea which mirrors what Labour was doing prior to the election around urban development authorities. It's this idea of this monolithic authority which basically builds houses around the country under some sort of utilitarian function. The problem with it is, as we've been saying right throughout, is A, that it's unnecessary. It doesn't actually need to be done, that it's going to be overly complicated, it's going to ride roughshod over private property rights, and it's going to become a monolithic bureaucracy that people will love to hate within a few years. But with all of that aside, I think you can expect to see that there'll be some indication of funding for the establishment of that authority in this budget.
So what's going to be good for you? Nothing.
Yeah, nothing's a Clarity's going to be really good. I mean, if we can get some indication, taking off my property hat now and looking at the country as a whole, if we can get some indication that the sorts of things that this government wants to do over the next 3 years are integrated into some sort of bigger plan, which is actually going to tell us not just where they're going, but what those things are going to cost and where that money's going to come from, that will be useful. I guess for me, the problem is I'm not overly confident that that's going to happen. I'm looking at the landscape at the moment and I'm seeing lots of isolated different things which are primarily around funding vested interests and groups that supported them prior to the election. What I'm not seeing is this big picture. So we've got pretty clear constraints around the way that the economy is actually being managed by Robertson, but no clear picture as to where the country is likely to go. So let's see what happens in the budget and see whether I'm wrong. Hopefully I am.
Always love to chat. Thanks so much for your time this morning, Ashley. Ashley Church from the Property Institute.
Thanks, Jack.